Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to give everybody a moment to file into our virtual room here. So go ahead, grab some water, grab some snacks. You're about to get a lot of good information sent your way. My name is Stephanie Neely. I'm the marketing director here at CEA. As everybody gets comfy, I'm going to go ahead and get us started with some light housekeeping. Again, thank you all for joining us today for the What Do You Do When ICE Shows Up at Your Business webinar, sponsored by Alameda County Workforce Development Board. We've got a few details to go over with you, a little bit of information. Your audio will be muted throughout this presentation, but we're going to ask for your participation in the Q&A box and the chat box. If you have any questions about the presentation content, you can type them into the Q&A box at any time, and we will address them as we go. We have Juliana Gabriel, our Senior HR Compliance Director, who's going to be the wizard behind the curtain, answering all of your HR questions in that Q&A box. The handouts for this presentation were attached to the reminder email that was sent out yesterday. I will also be uploading them into the chat box soon, so you can download them from there if you did not receive them in your email. If you run into any issues, just let me know in the chat box and I'll make sure you get a copy. And because your feedback is very important to us, please complete the survey at the end of this presentation. We'll have a QR code pop up, snap a picture with your phone. It's like 3 questions. It's very short, I promise. We use your feedback to constantly improve our webinars, think of new topics. Anything you can give us, we love getting your feedback. All right. And now, before we start our presentation, I would like to hand this over to Javier Contreras with a word from Alameda County.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And I want to thank the team here, CEA team. They do a fantastic job. And I want to thank you for attending this morning with this great webinar. And hopefully you'll get it. CEA is a great organization. I believe that each and every one of you, if you don't know about the hotline, I strongly encourage you to get this number here. Take a screenshot and please contact them and find out some information that you need to know for your business. But again, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today, and I hope that you get something out of this webinar, and we want to hear back from you. The number here is 888-202-5668 for the hotline. And I know that a lot of employers here in Alameda County have been reaching out to that number to get some information regarding their workplace rules and policies. Again, thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Javier. We hope you guys get a chance to call in. We're here for you Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Here for help you with your HR guidance. All right, and next up, I'm going to introduce Eli Nunez. He is our subject matter expert today. He's an HR director here at CEA. He is a wonderful speaker, and so I'm going to leave you in his very capable hands. Take it away, Eli.
Wow, thank you for that great introduction. Very flattering. Thank you, Javier, for all the information and for partnering with us. That number is up there for you. If you have any questions, whether it's about this presentation or anything else related to HR topics, your workforce, if you just need to talk a situation out with us and have another set of ears, give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. With that, we are California Employers Association, and our mission here is to provide peace of mind to our callers, to our members, to anyone we're associated with, such as you when you call the hotline. We provide training such as this, advice over the phone. We are very responsive. Usually when you call, you get someone on the phone immediately or a call back shortly thereafter. So please, again, if there's any questions regarding any HR topic or employment topics, give us a call. We'd love to help. I'd also like to add that we are not lawyers. And even though we do have people on our team with legal experience, we do not give legal advice. We are going to be talking about some subjects that are possibly related to law or that sort of thing, but all our presentations are from an educational perspective. In other words, going to provide you information, give you what the laws are, the guidelines, but ultimately the decision of what you do is up to you. Again, if you have any questions of legal importance, we do recommend that you consult with legal counsel to discuss them and to get the best direction that way. So with that, now that we got the fine print out of the way, let's jump right into what we'll be talking about today. Of course, you heard about talk about what to do when ICE shows up at your business. So We're going to cover a few topics. First one is, the increased immigration enforcement. Where is that increase coming from and why? How to prepare for a workplace raid or visit. What are some steps you can do beforehand to make it easier for you if or when immigration shows up. Talk a little bit about the form I-9, which is honestly having good I-9 forms like a good shield to help, prevent any of those issues. And finally, how you go about auditing those I-9 forms. So with that, you may be asking, well, why now? Why has there been such an increase in ICE activity? And as you know, our current president really campaigned on the promise of cracking down on illegal immigration, if you will. This was followed up by an executive order signed on January 20th. I believe it was called the Protecting American People Against Invasion Order. And basically, in it, it has to hire more ICE agents to increase enforcement, increase actions as far as immigration goes. Furthermore, the administration did set an internal goal of 3,000 arrests per day. It's, pretty well publicized. The chief of staff, I believe it was, mentioned he wants 3,000 arrests per day, which is a drastically high number. And along with this, comes with other approaches. So agents have also been asked to increase or have a certain number of I-9 inspections per week. Um, and again, this continued. Recently we had the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or as you call it, OBA, that passed on July 4th. And this saw a dramatic increase in the money being spent or given to ICE or Immigration and Custom Enforcement to the tune of 170 billion. There's been, news numbers thrown around that the budget for this enforcement is higher than many militaries across the world, right? So that is a huge, huge increase in budget and spending going towards this topic as well. And with that, I mean, it comes a push for more recruiting for more agents. So there's been talk of student loan forgiveness and even signing bonuses for, people joining Immigration and Customs Enforcement or ICE. Um, Furthermore, I mean, even the Department of Homeland Security has told us that ICE arrests have increased dramatically compared to prior years. Um, take that one with a grain of salt, right? What constitutes an arrest now versus a detention before, what have you. But what we do know is that there is definitely more enforcement actions, more, you know, basically drastic, visible actions going on out there. And as employers, of course, this is concerning for us because, we ask ourselves, well, what's this mean for us? Obviously, it could cause a disruption in our workforce, disruption in our employees, maybe some longtime employers, that sort of thing. But there's also other risks for us as employers for not complying with those immigration laws. For instance, there are civil penalties associated with being found either to be in violation, to be employing somebody that's not properly documented or that sort of thing. And civil penalties range, and this is according to the government websites, anywhere from $700 to up to around $28,000 per individual, right? So as you can imagine, I mean, those penalties can add up quickly. On top of that, there could also be criminal penalties if there's an established pattern of violations. In other words, if it's established that the business engages in the practice of hiring undocumented people or not properly verifying documentation, then there could be criminal penalties, which include not just fines, but also prison time for these violations. So, with that, I mean, I'd like to ask, we do have a poll for you if you'd like to launch it. How do you feel your organization is prepared for an ICE raid? Let us know. What do you think? How prepared do you feel for if ICE were to come knocking at your door today? So let us know what you think here, and we'll see, how that compares to some other information out there. All right, give everybody a minute or so just to let us know what you think there. What do you think? How prepared are you for an ICE raid? Let's see here. And cannot see on my end if the results are in. What do you think?
And we've got about
Most people,
most
right?
people have replied now, and we
Uh-huh.
have almost 40% who feel somewhat prepared,
Hmm.
and we have another 40% who are, oh, it
There
keeps
we go.
changing. People are answering. They're not sure what to expect, and
Someone not sure.
20% already feel well informed.
Hey, for that 20%, thank you, Stephanie. My hat's off to you. Good job. Sounds like you're doing your homework, going through, checking your processes and everything. So great job. SHRM did conduct a poll and found that more than half of HR professionals felt their organization is not prepared for an ICE raid. Uh, Variety of reasons, right? Could be because maybe they don't feel their processes are as strong as they could be, or it could just be because we don't know what to expect, right? There's a lot of things going on out there. Turn on the news, you look at social media. There's a lot of different things going on, so we don't know what to expect, and that could lead to that feeling of not being prepared. And that's what we're here for, right? We're going to talk about some pointers, what your rights are, what your employees' rights are, and what you can do to prepare. We never know what the future is going to bring, but we can always put some tools in place to make sure that we can deal with whatever comes our way. So let's talk about, what happens in a raid itself. What are your rights and what are your organization's rights for starters, right? So the thing to keep in mind, of course, is that if Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Border Patrol, USCIS, whatever you want to call them, if they were to visit your business or show up at your business, they don't have to give you advance notice. They can just show up at your door. And the thing to keep in mind is that law enforcement agencies can go into your business to any public area without a court order or warrant. In other words, if you're, say, a restaurant, you know, law enforcement, ICE in this case, would be able to walk into your restaurant, walk into the dining area, walk into the bar area, whatever it is, anywhere where the public can enter, they're allowed to be there as well. Same thing for any other business. If you have a public parking lot, they could go into the parking lot, they could go up into the lobby, that sort of thing. So again, any area that's accessible to customers, the patrons, to the general public, you know, ICE can visit. Usually, we wouldn't worry too much about it, right? You say, well, they're going to show up, they're going to visit, but again, what's this approach going to look like? Are you going to have one or two agents that show up and present you documentation, or are you going to have a couple carloads or a couple truckloads of agents show up in, full body armor and face coverings and everything? As you can imagine, that would be quite the disruption. So again, just keep that in mind. Any public area is open for ICE to be present in, right? And the reason for these visits, they can vary. Could be, it could just be looking to collect any kind of documentation, any kind of evidence, call it observation, just a fishing expedition, whatever you want to call it. They can just show up for that. They can show up if they're there to detain a specific person. In other words, someone's got an order, a removal order, or something along those lines. So ICE can show up at your business looking for that specific person, or they can show up to verify documentation, right? They can show up either because to see if your I-9s are in order, and we'll talk about what that looks like here in a couple slides, or to see if everyone's got the correct um, labor condition applications or that sort of thing. So again, many different reasons they can show up, many different approaches that they can use. And of course, it's not just ICE that shows up at your business. If you've paid attention to some of these raids that we see on the news or some of these events we see on the news, you see, law enforcement from all kinds of different agencies show up in conjunction, right? You could have Immigration and Customs Enforcement or ICE. You could have people from the Department of Homeland Security that oversees that organization, or Customs and Border Protection. That's a border patrol, right? You'd imagine, well, what's the border patrol doing in Alameda or Oakland? Well, thing to keep in mind is that the border patrol has the right to be within 100 miles of any national borders, which includes the coastline. So that's you know quite a bit of California covered if you think about it, right? U.S. Citizens and Immigration Services or USCIS, again, Border Patrol, those can all show up either individually or in conjunction for a visit. So when they show up, the question might arise, do I have to let them into any private areas of my business? In other words, if I have a front office, a lobby, and they show up, do I have to let them into, my manufacturing area or my kitchen or, my private offices or anything like that? And The answer to that really is, it depends. It depends, what they present to you, how they show up. And, we like to say, know your warrants, right? Hopefully when they show up, they have some kind of documentation, some kind of legal order asking to be let in. And, these things can vary, right? And they all grant them a little bit different access or different leeway into what they can do. So, we like to say, always know your warrants, know what you are looking at. And I mean, we could talk, for over an hour just on warrants themselves. But again, we'd rather just give you the resources so you can do a little more research onto them as well. So if you follow that bit.ly link, it'll show you some, important difference to know between things like judicial search warrants, judicial arrest warrants, and administrative warrants. It's important to know the differences between these because they're going to grant the agents different accesses or the ability to do different things in your workplace. For instance, a judicial warrant is something, it's a court order basically signed by a judge that basically allows them either entry into a specific area or into your workplace, or um, the ability to seize a person or any item. So basically, judicial warrants like a search warrant that we hear about, right? That allows them entry into different areas. Now, a judicial warrant should be signed and dated by a judge, and you want to be sure that when you are presented one of these, you take a look at it very closely to see if it's something that has limitations to it, right? So if you have a huge work area and the search warrant says that they can come in and search the offices, that means that hey, they can only search the offices. That's not a blanket thing where you just open the doors and walk out and give them free reign. So pay attention to see what the limitations are to those, and you also want to make sure that they're completed properly. Is the right address on them? Are they signed? Are they dated? Is everything correct on there, right? So again, and something else to keep in mind too is if you show up with an arrest warrant, then you may be required to identify the employee named in the warrant, right? So again, the judicial warrant, that's basically going to be the stronger one out of the documents that arrive because that's signed by a judge. That's basically a court order, ordering you to allow them in. Failure to comply with it can come with penalties. The other thing that ICE can show up with is an administrative warrant. And these are much, much, much more limited. Now, administrative warrants are issued by ICE themselves. So it's basically, if you will, marching orders, right? The immigration officer or the immigration judge gives ICE this order that says, hey, go look for this, but doesn't give him permission to go in there, doesn't give him permission to go into any private areas, doesn't give him permission to seize any documents or anything like that. It's basically just an order telling him, hey, go do this, but doesn't give him the ability to do anything beyond that, right? Administrative warrants do not, allow for search and seizure of private areas or anything like that. So you want to make sure that you're able to identify within the two different type of warrants. And usually, administrative warrants will have something like Department of Homeland Security on it, and it'll be either Form I-200 or an I-205. Look on the bottom to see what that form is. And again, doesn't require you to give them access to private areas, identifying employees in the warrants, or any of that without any consent. So, take a look at that bit.ly we mentioned earlier so you can tell the difference between those judicial and administrative warrants because, again, knowing what you have to do versus, what you don't is a great way to protect your rights. Okay. And as I mentioned, we Customs and Border Protection or the Border Patrol can patrol within 100 miles of the U.S. border. They can also conduct stops, right? Inspection stops, arbitrary stops, basically, without, reasonable cause or what have you within 100 miles of the border. And as I mentioned, I mean, the border does include the coastline. So, being in Alameda County, of course, you probably are within 100 miles of the coastline. So there is a good chance that they can, you know, be on patrol within a large area of California. Now, with that, a question does come up is if ICE does show up into my business with an administrative warrant or without a judicial search warrant, can I voluntarily allow them into private areas of my business? In other words, if they show up and they ask me, hey, we don't have a warrant, but we'd like to search your business. Can we come in? Can you just, be a nice guy and say yes? Well, not necessarily. And we got some guidance from the state of California, and this is from AB Assembly Bill 450. This is a law that went into effect in 2018, and this is, part of what many people call the sanctuary laws or sanctuary bills. And one of the things that did was it basically prohibited employers from letting immigration agents into private areas without a warrant, right? Now, the thing about this is, this thing was tied up in court for quite a long time. Started in 2018, almost as soon as it went into place, it was tied up in court, saying it went against federal law, so on and so forth. And for the longest time, the guidance was, well, this doesn't really apply to California. This protections apply. Well, earlier this year, the California Department of Justice actually released guidance in February of this year, stating, you know, giving this as a guidance that says, hey, California employers may not provide voluntary consent into any non-public areas of place and labor unless the agent has a valid judicial warrant to access the area. So that makes it much more important, again, to be able to differentiate between those judicial search warrants and administrative warrants to know whether you have to give ICE access to those private areas. So in other words, if ICE is going to access those private areas, they need a court order to do it. They can't just get your permission to do it, right? So as employers, what rights do you have during a raid? If ICE shows up, they have documentation or what have you, they show up at your business, what rights do we have as employers? And the first one is, we don't have to confirm whether a person is working that day or identify them without a judicial warrant. So in other words, if they just show up with an administrative warrant, say, we got this order of removal from ICE, is this person here? Is this that person? You do not have to confirm whether they're working that day or not. You can also ask them for identifying information. In other words, if ICE shows up at your door, you can ask for names, you can ask for badge numbers, you can take notes, you can, write down any information you see fit for during that interaction. And if they do show up with, a way to search, you can accompany them throughout the workplace, but just be very careful that it's not considered interference with what they are doing. What's interference, you ask? That may be more of a legal question, right? Because that can be interpreted different ways. It's basically no not physically obstructing, not, doing anything that would be seen as interfering with their duty. But you can accompany them. If they're going through your workplace, you can accompany them. You can follow them. You can take notes, who they talk to, what they're doing, that they go somewhere they're not supposed to go, that sort of thing. You want to make sure you're documenting as much as you can for that visit. Are they talking to your employees? Are they asking questions about citizenships or things that they shouldn't? You want to be sure that you document all of that information during the visit. Now, speaking of employees too, there are some rights that employees have during a workplace raid or visit, and it's very important that they are aware of these as well. Now, this is something that you can, you know, teach your employees or give them resources to where they can find this information as well. We'll have a list of resources at the end of this presentation that you can use to help educate your employees. And the first one of these, of course, these rights, these protections, of course, are derived from the United States Constitution, I believe the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. The first one is an immigration officer can't search people or their belongings without probable cause, a judicial warrant, or their consent. So, in other words, if ICE shows up with just an administrative warrant, they can't just go in there and start, ransacking your break room or going through people's bags or anything. Employees also have the right to remain silent under the Fifth Amendment, and this applies to everybody. The Fifth Amendment, the Constitution doesn't say that this only applies to citizens, but not non-citizens or what have you. This protection applies to everybody, right? So employees do have the right to remain silent. So as employers, we can inform employees of this right. We can tell them, hey, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but we can instruct them not to respond. So there's a fine line, right? Semantics. How are we wording this thing? So again, that's why it's important not just to educate yourself as employers, but also to educate your employees of what their rights are, and of course, a right to a hearing with an immigration judge if they are arrested, a right to due process. That's also, uh, in the Constitution. That's also part of their rights. Keep in mind, though, if an employee or someone tries to flee during a raid, this may be seen as probable cause for them being detained, for them being stopped, for them being questioned, right? So again, that's why it's important, again, to educate your employees as well and let them know, hey, if you try to run, that gives ICE a reason to stop you, to question you, to detain you, and so on and so forth. So again, panicking, running, that's basically never a good idea. It could also be the reason why, when we see a lot of these raids, you see, large numbers of officers show up, possibly have like a shock and awe approach, right? To try to maybe cause a reaction. So again, inform your employees of what their rights are, what they should do, what they shouldn't do if they don't want to attract any attention. So when talking about preparation, let's talk about how you develop a plan in case of a raid. How do you protect your business and protect your employees? Because again, being prepared before it happens is better than trying to react afterwards without having anything in place. So the first thing you're going to do when it comes time to develop a plan is we want to have somebody who's going to be the response coordinator. In other words, who's in charge? Who's going to speak on behalf of the company? And what you can do here is, get your leadership team together and talk about how are we going to respond to this. Who is the best person to be the point person for if ICE comes to visit, or any of these agencies come to visit. And it's important to be really really open and really honest when we're having this discussion, right? Because a lot of times you'll say, well, it should be human resources, it's their job, right? Well, you know take a close, honest look at yourself and everybody involved. Am I the best person to talk to, these agents? Do I get nervous? Am I confident enough to do it? That sort of thing, right? Be very analytical and very honest when you're trying to identify who this on-site response coordinator is, because, basically any misstep there can open a few doors that you don't want to go down, right? So the other thing to keep in mind is, maybe have a checklist, or have some kind of form of information the coordinator is going to gather with this interaction with ICE, right? So some of the things to keep in mind, what agencies show up. Was it just ICE? Was it Customs and Border Patrol, USCIS, ATF, FBI, Sheriff, whatever it is? Names of all the agencies there, badge numbers, names, any information that's possible. The other thing you want to know is, is part of your process contacting legal counsel? Do you have an attorney that you want to contact, in the case of a nice visit? Or who else needs to be contacted, right? Do you have a communication plan? Who are you going to call outside of the organization, whether it's, legal counsel, owners if they're not on site, you know, any kind of director, that sort of thing. And also, how are you going to notify people within the organization, right? Remember, I mean, you want to keep your employees informed of what's going on to try to prevent any kind of panic response, any kind of running, any kind of interference, or any kind of action that goes on back there that could be seen as a reason for an escalation. So, if you do have a communication plan, how are you going to communicate to the staff, right? Do you have like a phone tree or a way to waterfall that information down to let them know what is going on? So, the way you could do this is, have coordinators, have on-site response coordinators, right? So the first one, of course, is going to be the person that's interacting with the agency when they show up. So you want to make sure that they're trained on, what to look for. If they're presented with a warrant, what kind of warrant is it? Can they identify it? Is it properly filled out? Are they given a copy? That sort of thing, um, right? If your coordinator is not going to be the first person to make contact with ICE, in other words, if you have like a receptionist, that receptionist needs to be trained as well on what to do until the coordinator comes into place, right? So it could be maybe asking ICE to wait in a specific area, a designated area, whether it's a conference room or whether it's just right in the lobby. What is going to be the the steps that they're going to follow if ICE shows up. In some cases, too, you might even consider having a workplace raid drill if it's right for your business. And this is going to differ based on different industries, different businesses, different sizes, or what have you. But, it could be worth practicing, right? What do we do if ICE shows up? Just to make sure that, if you're communicating to your employees that the flow of information is correct, that the right information is getting down there. Nobody's panicking. Everybody's doing what they have to do to make sure everyone is staying safe, and no one is, overreacting or putting themselves or somebody else in danger. There's also some, if you will, engineering controls or environmental controls you can put in place that can help for a nice visit. Call this preparing your workplace, right? So if you have any restricted areas or any areas that are employee only, you want to make sure those are clearly labeled. So if you have like a, say, manufacturing area, make sure it's labeled employees only. If you're in a restaurant, make sure places like the kitchen or other places are labeled employees only. If you have an employee parking lot, make sure that it's clearly labeled as well. Remember, if areas are restricted to employees only, they cannot be entered without a judicial warrant. So that's yet another way to keep your employees safe as well, right? And you want to make sure that, your employees, your receptionist, all line level managers are trained on what these restricted areas mean. In other words, if you have an employee that's maybe taking a break outside of the break room, and a nice agent comes up to him and say, "Oh, what's that? It's the employee break room. Oh, can I come in? Yeah, sure, come on in." They've just been invited in, right? And once they're in there, I mean, they're in there. So make sure that you train your employees to know, hey, these specific areas are employees only. Nobody can enter without permission from, the receptionist, or without permission from management, or whatever it is. So again, make sure you're training your employees on what restricted areas mean, and who can grant those, access to those areas as well. The other thing is, look environmentally, look around your work area, look around the public areas. What information do you have out there? Do you leave employee files laying around? Are the computer screens facing the public area? Can somebody just come in and kind of look over the counter and see what's laying out there? Be sure you're not leaving any sensitive information laying out there, right? Because, ICE and law enforcement can look at things that are in plain view and use that as probable cause. You know, oh, we're looking for a specific employee and we notice there's a roster sheet sitting out there with their name on it, so we know they're here. That's something that's simple, right? So again, just make sure you're protecting your data, protecting your information. Make sure you're not leaving things out in plain view that shouldn't be out there. And finally, worst case scenario, make sure that your employees' emergency contacts and contact information are all kept up to date. If one of your employees were to be detained, taken to custody, taken, whatever you want to call it, you want to make sure that you know who to contact in their home, right? For various reasons. One, let them know that, hey, this happened, so they can contact legal counsel. They can contact, get legal help. They can, make other preparations. The other thing is, if you have a parent that's taken, they have kids at school, who's going to pick them up? What's going to happen? So again, make sure, for various reasons, make sure that your employees' contact information is always up to date, audited on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly, twice a year, whatever it is. Make sure that you're updating that, because you want to be able to, um, get a hold of somebody if your employee were to be taken into custody. Okay. And along with that, comes other making sure other documentation is in order, right? So again, the I-9 form is something that, it's basically one of the first documents that's filled out whenever an employee comes into an organization. So we want to make sure that the staff that handles that I-9 form is trained on how to complete them properly, what to look for, how to make sure that they are compliant. So the USCIS does give us resources for that. They have an employer handbook that kind of guides us on how to properly complete a 99 form, what to look for, how to identify documents, that sort of thing. So some things you want to pay special attention to is making sure that you have the most current I-9 version. Now these change from time to time. They've changed pretty recently, actually. We had one in January of this year. There was an update to the form that was just released a year ago, right? There was, some minor language changes there to kind of reflect this administration's ideology. So you want to make sure that you have the most current I-9 form. Now that doesn't mean that when a new I-9 form comes out, you have to go back and, use that form for all your existing employees. That just means that for any incoming employee, you use the newest I-9 form available. You want to audit them on a regular basis too. I mean, we'd like to think that we always get it right the first time, but we don't. We don't always get things right the first time. So once we fill out a 99 form, put it in the file, go back and check on them from time to time. And we always recommend, keep them in binders separate from personnel files. You can keep the I-9 form in the file, but again, if you get an order to review I-9 forms from ICE or any other federal agency, and it's sitting inside all the employee files, you have a couple options. You can either go out and pull them out one at a time and give it to them, or you have to hand over the whole file. And as with any other, you know, documentation or anything else that you present to any agency, we recommend only presenting to them exactly what they ask for. Nothing more, nothing less. So with that thing, if you have your I-9 forms separate in a standalone binder and they ask for your I-9 forms, guess what? That's all you're giving them. You're not giving them access to any other employee information, anything else. Just what they asked for, right? So you're going to keep them in the binder, alphabetized by last name so they're easy to access, easy to audit, easy to, you know, make sure they're kept up to date. So some tips for the coordinator, once you elect who's going to be our coordinator, who's going to be our point person for dealing with ICE. In the event of a visit, and I know this is easier said than done, but you want to make sure this person can remain calm, not be confrontational, not interfere, but just remain calm. This is an interaction. Remember, you're an employer, you're an employee, you're a person, you have rights. So remain calm. You're protected by those, right? Verify why they're there. Do they have a judicial warrant to search the whole work area, a part of the area, to ask for documents, or do they have an administrative warrant? I mean, the administrative warrant, you can say, well, thank you, I know why you're here, but that's about all that's good for, right? Take notes. As a coordinator, who's there, what agency's there, take names, badge numbers, business cards, that sort of thing. Ask for a warrant. If they're there to search for anything, ask them for a warrant. If they do show you a warrant, ask them for a copy of it. Don't just let them flash the warrant, put it back in their pocket, and walk on by. Ask for a copy of it, take a look at it, make sure it's filled out correctly, make sure it's dated, make sure it's signed, see if there's any limitations. Are they there just to look at I-9s? Is that all the warrant authorized them to do? Are they there just to inspect one office, or are they there to inspect the whole place? That should be outlined in the warrant, and that's what these agents should be limited to. Never block an ICE agent's movement. Remember, anything could be interpreted as interfering with a federal agent and can cause some kind of escalation, or for them to, go beyond what they were initially there for. So if you have any objection to what they're doing, clearly and politely state that objection. Be clear, be polite, but again, do not physically block that agent. Do not put yourself in danger. And of course, if you need to contact legal counsel, give them a call immediately. Now, in some cases, if legal counsel is going to be your point person for talking to ICE, in other words, if you want ICE to conduct all their business through your legal counsel, not through anybody on site, it's very important that you have documentation to show ICE that your legal counsel is your primary point of contact. That is a Form G28 is what that form is called, and it's in the USCIS website. And what that form basically does is it tells the agent or whoever is there that any business, any business they have there should go through that attorney. That you're giving that attorney the authorization to speak on behalf of the business, on behalf of yourself, whatever it is. So make sure, if that is the approach you're taking, that any business that ICE has should be handled by your attorney, that you have a Form G28 on file, and that as soon as ICE walks in that door, before they even open their mouths, you present that form to them, right? Talk to my attorney, right? Any business you have here goes through an attorney. Let me get them on the phone and you could talk to them about it. So again, it's a Form G28. And again, be polite, be respectful, but be firm. We have policies in place, we have laws in place, we have rights, so we are going to stand on those. That's our protection, right? So For example, you could say something like, I'm sorry, but it's company policy not to provide consent to enter any non-public areas of our facility or to access our information or records without a valid warrant signed by a judge. So they say, oh, well, can't you just make exception? Nope. Show me the warrant. Show me the warrant, or you're free to, stand around. But without a warrant, I can't help you. Right? Again, we're being polite, we're being respectful, but we're being firm. All right, let's talk a little bit more about I-9 inspections. And we'll talk about why having the I-9 forms in good order is so important, right? First, though, let's talk about one of the frequently asked questions. If ICE wants to look at our I-9s, will they give us any notice prior to auditing? Or can they just show up to our door and ask to see our I-9s? What do you think? Let me know in the chat. Does ICE have to give us notice if they want to look at our I-9s, or do we have to present them upon their arrival? What do you think? Any thoughts on that? Take a chance to get a drink of water in the meantime. The thing about that is, when it comes to I-9 inspections, ICE can request to view our I-9 forms, but they have to do so in writing in what's called a notice of inspection. And that's a written form basically that ICE has to present us when they want to look at our I-9 forms. That form should give us 72 hours to provide those records to ICE. In other words, once they give us that form, we have 3 days to produce those records, right? And in California, there are some other responsibilities, some other steps we have to take as employers. We have to post a notice saying that, we've received a notice of inspection. And if we're in a union environment, we have to provide that notice to the union representatives as well. But we always want to ask for that written notice, right? I'm sure, the ICE agent's a nice guy and he's trustworthy, but we do not want to take their word for it. Ask for the written notice of inspection if they request to view your I-9 forms. And again, that notice of inspection is going to give you 72 hours to produce those forms. I don't care if that binder is in your hand when they walk in. We always recommend take those 72 hours before presenting them. Reason's very simple. That's an extra 72 hours for you to go through and audit what you have there to make sure that it's correct to the best of your knowledge. Again, we don't always get things right the first time. For all maybe somebody went through and had to update an I-9 yesterday and you didn't know about it and there's something missing. So take those 3 days to do a final audit on those I-9 forms before presenting them. Because the thing is, an I-9 audit may seem, it's like a formality, right? It's documentation. But if they find any proof of things that are out of order, that could open the door to further inspection, further questioning, or anything like that. So again, if they're giving you 3 days to present that document or to produce that documentation for them, take those 3 days to double check it. So how at risk are we of ICE audits? We've talked about it a little bit. I mean, are they really happening? And honestly, yeah. I mean, they're happening quite a bit actually. During the first term, I mean, during Trump's first term, I-9 audits increased every year. Why? And at their peak, there was 12,000 audits per year before COVID-19. There's anticipation that with the new agents, the increase in budget and everything, ICE audits will increase. And the reason for that's simple. I mean, it's low-hanging fruit. Paperwork errors. It's a great way to identify who's working where, right? It's in a way it's easy pickings. If your I-9s are not in order, that's going to possibly open the door for penalties or for further actions by ICE. So again, yeah, there's definitely a risk there. So we want to make sure that, we're auditing these I-9s. Everything's in order. Make sure that, we're completing them to the best of our abilities and completing them correctly or as correctly as possible. Um, you know, when you talk about ICE raids, you think of ICE raids, we look at things like, ICE showing up at workplaces, ICE chasing people down, ICE showing up at, you know, hardware stores or what have you. But fact of the matter is, I mean, these audits are maybe the primary tool or could become the primary tool for any kind of detention in the future as as there's more legal challenges or more resistance to the more public displays or the more public arrests. So, don't be surprised if there's a flurry of more ICE audit notice of inspections coming out here in the coming months or coming years. So, how do you conduct an internal audit? Well, I mean, it's important to do just to make sure that we're identifying any simple errors, omissions, that sort of thing, right? So, we always recommend you do it at least annually. At least annually. Twice a year would be, great. Quarterly would be ideal, but at least once a year, you want to make sure that you're going through and auditing those I-9s, right? Any errors you can find, we're going to correct them. And, by showing that we're auditing them and showing that we're going through and fixing the errors, at least it's going to show that we're acting in good faith, that we care about the process, we care about what we're doing, and we're going through and correcting any errors we may have made. So, how do you conduct an audit? Well, going to designate who's going to do it, whether it's somebody internal, HR, payroll, whoever it is, someone that's trained on I-9s, or you're going to bring in an outside party to audit your I-9s for you. Both are perfectly valid ways to do it. The first thing you need to do is, look to see who your employees are and who your recent terms are. There's retention guidelines for I-9. So just because somebody quits doesn't mean we could shred that I-9, right? So we have to include active employees, and sometimes we have to retain them for employees that have been gone for a couple of years. So again, make sure that you're familiar with those retention guidelines, so you're not just tossing out I-9s as soon as the person walks out the door. Once once you're allowed to purge documents, get rid of them. Right? Once it's outside of those guidelines, make sure that we're getting rid of those documents just to maintain our files as clean as possible. Okay. So speaking of those retention guidelines, obviously you have to have an I-9 for every current employees, right? And if an employee leaves or is terminated, you have to retain that I-9 form for either 3 years from their date of hire or 1 year after their termination, whichever is later. So if you have somebody that comes in and works for you for a week and then quits, guess what? You have to hold on to that I-9 for 3 years, regardless of whether they were there for a day, a year, or a decade, right? 3 years. Or 1 year after the date of employment ended, whichever one of those is longer. Okay. Um, Again, make sure you have all the I-9 forms in one place, one binder, outside of the personnel files. And once ICE gives you that 72-hour notice of inspection, use those 72 hours to go through and make sure that things are in order. If you find out that you're missing a I-9 form for some reason, whether you change buildings, change binders, never collected one from the beginning, whatever it is, you're going to give the employee the most current version of the I-9 form. You're not going to go back and give them the one from when they were hired 5 years ago. You're going to give them the most current version, complete it. You're not going to backdate the form, but you are going to add an explanation to it. Attach an explanation to it. Say, we conducted an I-9 audit on August, 28th or whatever it was, and found this form missing. Completed the new one. Boom. Put it on there, file it. You're good to go. Other ways to address mistakes, of course, we're going to be consistent with how we address them, right? Once we have a process, we're going to follow that process for all of our I-9s. If you find any mistakes, don't cross them out, don't white them out, nothing like that. Just a quick line out on it so you can still see what was behind it and enter the correct information along with an initial and the date of correction on there. You can even attach some kind of memo or something in the back explaining what the correction was, when it was done, and why it was done. Okay? And it's very important to, when you're completing these I-9 forms, make sure that you know who is filling out which one. Okay. There's certain parts that the employee fills out, certain parts the employer fills out. So make sure that the right person is filling out the right one. If you have to make any corrections because you fill out the wrong part or the employee fill out the wrong part, make sure that you write a memo for what that correction is and attach it to it as well. Now, if an employee changes their name, whether it's legal name change, marriage, divorce, whatever it is, you're not required to update the I-9 form because what the I-9 is, it's a snapshot of when they were hired, right? And what that snapshot tells you is when this person was hired, they were legally authorized to work. So if they change their name, that's great. You don't have to, but we do recommend it because again, it's good to have any kind of documentation or record of any changes. So if an employee does change their name, you can use what's called supplement B now on the new I-9 to document that. You just attach it to the existing I-9. Okay, they don't have to show. They're not required to show new documentation, but you should take steps to you know reasonably assure of the employee's identity. So in other words, if they come in and tell you, hey, I changed my name because I got married, it's like, okay, well, here's supplement B. Do you want to present your marriage certificate or whatever so we could have documentation, or do you have a new social security card or what have you? They can present it, they can not, whatever it is, but just take reasonable steps to make sure, to verify that identity. If you rehire or you need to re-verify somebody's I-9, you're going to use supplement B for that as well. And speaking of rehires, I mean, do you have to have a new I-9 when you rehire somebody? And that depends. That depends on when you rehired them. So if it's within 3 years of when they completed the original I-9, you can either use the original form and supplement B to re-verify, or you can complete a new one. If it's after 3 years, you have to complete a new I-9 form. So again, I mean, the easiest path may be just to use a new one, but if it's within 3 years of the original form, you can just re-verify. It's up to you. However, we never re-verify forms for U.S. citizens or non-citizen nationals. In other words, people with green cards. We don't have to re-verify if their documents expired. I've worked at places where, I walked in and the practice was, well, so-and-so's driver's license expired, so they need a new I-9. It's like, no, they don't, because that document was valid when they were hired, right? So, and this goes for things like passports, passport cards, permanent resident or alien registration receipt cards, expired permanent resident cards, presented with the right documentation, identifying documents on List B like driver's licenses. We don't care about those expiration dates. Let them expire. It doesn't matter. We don't have to re-verify them. What you do have to re-verify is like an employment authorization document, or in other words, a work authorization or work permit, Form I-94 with a temporary stamp, unexpired foreign passport with a temporary stamp. In any of those cases, if they expire, the employee has to re-verify to say that they are still eligible to be employed in the United States. So something you can do if you have somebody that presents all those documents initially, maybe put a little tab or a post-it pad on there on the binder with the date, or put a reminder in the calendar to let you know that, hey, on a certain date, this document expires, so I should re-verify to make sure that the employee is still eligible to work. It's important to take all these steps because, I mean, we all make mistakes, right? So we want to be sure that, you know, if we do make a mistake, we can show that it was, a technical mistake. Maybe, we left something out, or we, transposed a number, or we typoed something or anything like that. We want to make sure that it shows that it was not a mistake as opposed to something that we did on purpose, right? That maybe we didn't complete an I-9 form for somebody because we thought they were ineligible, or we blatantly put wrong information on there or misleading information or something. So again, there is what's called the good faith defense, right? Basically shows that, hey, it was an honest mistake. We went back, we corrected it, that sort of thing. That's going to go a long ways if there are some errors on your I-9s. Okay. So, talked a little bit about the I-9 audit, notice of inspection. So, what happens with this notice of inspection? What happens once I submit my I-9s or copies of my I-9s to ICE for audit? What what's the next step? Well, after you give ICE your I-9s or your copies of your I-9s, you're going to take a look at them, and you'll get, one of the following notices. One will be the notice of inspection results, which is basically a compliance letter telling you, hey, good job. You're compliant. Your I-9s are in order. Way to go. Carry on. The other one is a notice of suspect documents, which basically tells you, we believe that some of the documents presented do not relate to the employees or are otherwise not valid. So, there could be some issues there. A notice of discrepancies, notice of technical or procedural failures, which basically finds technical mistakes, right? I mean, typos, missing birthdays, that sort of thing. A warning notice, basically that tells you they found, multiple violations on there, or a notice of intent to fine. That's basically letting you know that they found some failures, some procedural failures. Basically, you weren't following the right process, you weren't completing the forms as required, and you know there's likely to be fines or some kind of issue arising from it. So again, depending on which one you take, which one of these you receive, that's where your next steps are going to depend. Okay. There's also E-Verify, and questions come up about it. Can I use E-Verify instead of the I-9 process? What is E-Verify? Well, E-Verify is basically a free web-based service provided by USCIS. It goes in conjunction to the I-9 process. So in other words, you have to complete an I-9 for each new employee. E-Verify just basically is an electronic tool to help verify that the employee is eligible to work in the United States. So once you become an E-Verify employer, in other words, once you sign up for it and you start using it, you have to use it for all new hires going forward. And this is something that we run across if you have federal contracts, for instance. Sometimes federal contracts require employers to use E-Verify. And thing to keep in mind is once you sign up for E-Verify, again, you have to use it for all employees going forward until you terminate the program. So for E-Verify, basically you have to enter the employee's social security number, um, photo or ID documents, anything like that. You upload all of those, and the system, in theory, lets you know whether the person is authorized to legally work in the United States or not. There is more information there on that link. Is E-Verify a perfect program? It's a tool, right? It's a tool. Recently, there was a police officer in Maine who apparently went through the entire process, went through E-Verify. E-Verify said, yes, this person is fine to hire, and recently he just received an order to auto deport because he wasn't, you know, in the United States legally. So again, possibly not an infallible system. There could be some mistakes in it, but it is something that is required by the federal government for certain federal contractors. So if you are in that industry, you have to use it. And again, it's a tool, right? So if you choose to use it, make sure you know what your responsibilities are, what the employer's responsibilities are, and that there could be some limitations to it as well. Some additional resources for you too. We do have, some from USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. That handbook for employers basically lets you know what the I-9 process is, what that looks like, what your responsibilities are. We also have E-Verify. If you have any questions about E-Verify, you go to the USCIS website on there. The National Immigration Law Center also gives us a good guide on what to do if immigration comes to your workplace, as well as the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. If you want some resources for your employees, that's a great place to start. The California Office of the Attorney General does have resources for immigrants in the state of California, as well as the California Civil Rights Departments, the ACLU, and the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. There are also a lot of local community organizations that provide resources both for employers and for employees in different areas, whether it's things like legal support, workshops, education, whatever it is. There are a lot of resources out there beyond these, but these are a great place to start. Again, take a look at them, see what you can take for your organization as well as for sharing with your employees. That brings us to the 1 hour mark. So again, I'd like to thank the Alameda County Workforce Development Board for partnering with us, allowing us to present this information to you. Again, if you have any questions on this, we have the hotline. I'll open up to Juliana. Do we have any outstanding questions out there or anything?
Looks like we just got one that came in. If employees work off-site, do you have to inform ICE of their location? So that might come down to a legal question, but typically it would be based on what is called for in a judicial arrest warrant. Am I right, Eli?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, if they have a judicial arrest warrant, then you are required to produce the information, their location, whether they're there or not, or what have you. If they just show up with an administrative warrant looking for them, then you thank them for the scratch paper and move on.
All right,
So,
thank you. And I think that's all of our
all right,
outstanding questions, so we can
all
close
right.
out.
Thank you for that. So we do have some membership options if you are interested in anything beyond the hotline. You have 3 different levels, including a monthly option. And Stephanie did promise you a survey for your feedback. So please let us know what you thought about this presentation or what you'd like to hear about in the future as well. Take a snapshot of that QR code, answer those 3 quick questions, please. And, we'd love to hear from you. For those of you that are with us for continuing education, I do have some codes for you. For HRCI, it's 714716. And for SHRM, it's 25-JXFW3. So if you have any questions on how to use those codes, give us a call. We'll help you out, but if they look familiar to you, you probably know what to do with them. That, I'll hand it off to Steph if you want to take us home, or Javier, any final words?
No, that was great. I want to thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone that attended today. And I hope that this was beneficial for you and your organization. Again, thank you so much. That was great. Stephanie?
All right. Yes. Thank you so much, Eli. That was a ton of knowledge. So please make sure you guys write down that HR hotline phone number. Give us a call Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. We're here to answer any follow-up questions you might have. And again, thank you for bringing the slide up, Eli. Please take this survey. We would love to get your feedback. Let us know what you think of Eli. How did he do? Let us know what other topics you would like to hear about in the future. We'll see what new webinars we can bring for you. We love getting your feedback and hearing what you need as employers. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to talk to you soon. And please have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.